Welcome to the Edge of Greatness podcast.
What I want to know is there a tip that you would give or a pointer that you would make to help people kind of start to disassociate the emotion of a moment and then the mindset of overcoming that moment? Because it sounds like you have a natural ability to be disappointed but not let it affect the next step. And I think a lot of people, like we talked about just a little bit ago, is the emotion of that moment becomes so big that it carries negative effects on the next moment or the moment after that. And I see it a lot of times where all of a sudden it snowballs and then they get into a really, really dark place. And so was there something that you would maybe give as far as a tip or a pointer for them to help separate those pieces?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is mindfulness. I think that's something that can help us separate, that our current emotions and the moment and just, be present and in the now and create a distance between our reaction and the event. So I think mindfulness for one, but I also think, for me it was in a sense like failing a lot of different things in my childhood and my parents allowing that to happen and just, prioritizing effort rather than results. So they let me just try hard at things and then figure out if it sticks. And then the same thing with overcoming injuries, but I think we can do that in our lives without having these bigger failures. We can train ourselves with micro failures. So things like cold exposure or things like just training, like getting into the gym and doing things that are hard and being beat at in workouts, or putting ourselves into these things that don't necessarily matter in our scheme of career, or if you're an athlete, like it's not directly correlated to making it as an athlete, but allow us to have these small failures to build that mindset that when you do have these big failures, you kind of have those repetitions built up. So it's like just like mental exercises and mental training to deal with these small failures so you can deal with the bigger ones.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the exposure to failure helps us start to understand that it's not catastrophic. I had a conversation with a person a few episodes back, and they were talking about when was the last time you hit snooze, because in that moment you failed your alarm clock. And thinking of like failure in such a small term as that and not so catastrophic was like mind blowing to me to think, wow, yeah, you know what? That's right. That like we have failures all the time, but we always look at the big ones and like get set back by them because it's like this moment of, I was trying so hard to achieve this, and then that all just is wasted. Well, that's not true. You still gain something from it. That moment might not have been the right outcome, but we can still be better for it. Um,
Yes, I love that because I think I talked to a baseball player a couple weeks ago, and we were relating on the fact. So he ended up not making it to pro. He really thought he could, but he was dealing with some things where for some reason he was failing the throw from catcher to pitcher, even though he had an amazing arm. Like it was like that short throw, just like a mental block.
yeah.
And so he ended up not getting to go to pro, not signing a contract. And then that was like his biggest failure. He dealt with a lot of things mentally. Same with me, not making the Olympics and then retiring from snowboarding. Huge issue. But then he went on to like work in a major wealth management firm, living this career that everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You're set for life. And without questioning, just left and started his own thing. And I was like, did that failure before of not going pro and learning from that make you just feel this freedom where who cares, I can leave this and go start my own thing? He's like, yeah. And so I was like, I feel the same thing. Once you had that big failure and have learned that you're not going to die, like it's things are okay, you feel the sense of freedom that you can commit, like I've committed so many hours into competing in CrossFit over the pandemic. I've come to the terms with, if I want to get back to competition, I could do it if it's going to be fun for me. But if not, I don't care. There's no time lost. I learned so many lessons training for that I actually have no need or hole or void to fill by continuing to pursue this thing. I was like, you know what, I still think I have the potential, but if my injuries aren't overcomable, no loss to me. I learned a lot in the process, and I was like, wow, 5 years ago I would never have thought that. But you get this sense of freedom from having overcome one of those big failures.
Yeah, no, I think if we look close enough at the people who are at the highest levels and the most successful in the world, they've all experienced some level of a major failure along the way. I mean, even though like I don't consider myself to be at any high level in my career at all, but I was a baseball player in college. I wanted to play pro. It didn't work out. And at the time when it stopped, I was like, now what? what do I do? But it pushed me down a path into fitness. And then I had, a cool trainer that I met that pushed me into training. And now I own a gym. And I get to do a podcast and talk to ex-athletes and people who are successful. And it's been one of those learning processes through failures along the way, that each failure opens a door to the next phase of my growth. And I think that's the biggest thing, is can we learn from the mistakes that are happening? And so what I want to know is, with the people you've had a chance to talk to, obviously you got to compete at a high level, so you got to see some high level athletes there, but now also with your podcast and doing those types of things, do you feel like there's a correlation between the people who see the greatest success also having to deal with the larger failures?
100%. I thought about this for a while, is like, does struggle help you, get to that next level eventually? Because you see a lot of these high performers now, and especially the high performers who can enjoy their high performance, not the people who just won the lottery and now they're unhappy, not the people who started this business, suddenly it worked on the first try, but then they're unhappy dealing with this money and they're going down a bad path. Like the people who are achieving, but also just they would be happy with nothing. Those people with that mindset, I think 100% they learned those lessons at an earlier point in life. And it's something I think about a lot. For example, I advocated for mental health because I had dealt with it. And I think about it a lot because I'm grateful for that time because it taught me everything. But at the same time, I don't want anyone else to go through it. And so I struggle with that because I'm like, that time did allow me to achieve what I've done. But at the same time, it was so painful. I don't want other people to go through it. So I do think that some of those things, I think we can avoid some of the bigger pitfalls from learning from other people. But I do think we have to have some of these failures, whether they're massive or micro. We just have these pivot points and these learning moments that, progress us into that next stage. Because the people who do, they just start a business and boom, $1 billion and it works the first time. One, that's pretty rare. You don't really hear that. But for the few times it does, there's a reason why most lottery winners just lose all their money.
Yeah.
Or some of those business people end up like betting it all on the next business because they think they can't fail, and they just completely goes down the tank. So then they learn from those moments and hopefully build better the next time.
Yeah, no, I love how you said you want to like help people not have those moments, but at the same time you're conflicted with like those moments actually help define who I am. So while I don't want others to feel that pain, I know without that pain, I wouldn't be who I was. And I find that same thing for me as a parent. Like, I don't want my kids to fall and fail and to have these moments. But at the same time, I'm like, well, if you don't do that, you don't learn how to pick yourself up. So I struggle with that balance. And, it sounds like that's a common thing for you as well. So tell me about kind of that process for you, because I know you're working towards a TED Talk. You're working towards these different things of helping people learn from your experiences, as what I'm assuming is kind of part of this process for you. What do you put into it? What do you hold back from it? What do you encourage people to do as far as like finding their own way and struggling through those difficulties? Where does that balance kind of fall for you?
Yeah, I think in a sense, it's kind of like that quote of like, for example, training. It's like, it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. And so I like to think about that. For example, my TED Talk, currently the premise is going to be about failure and, just trying hard. And I used a hashtag like a year ago and some people caught on with it. It was like proud try hard. And I was like, you know what? I don't think, like, as a kid, I was judged all the time for saying, I'm going to be a pro snowboarder. Like, you suck right now. Like, you're not going to be a pro snowboarder. But I was just a proud try hard, like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I think it's teaching people the skills to deal with those things. Because, for example, the mental health issues that I dealt with after snowboarding, I'm sure there's things I could have done preemptively to deal with that better. Doesn't mean it's not going to hurt and I'm not going to go through that time. It just wouldn't have been quite as bad, and I would have bounced back quicker if I had some of the skills to deal with those things. So I think with anything, it's not, bubble wrapping our kids. It's just teaching them like they're going to be okay when these things happen and how they can bounce back from them, because that's how they do get stronger.
Yeah, no, I had a similar thing when baseball was gone for me. I went through a phase where I was like, well, who am I? And I think that's one of the areas too. Like, I don't want to assume with you, when you were snowboarding, did you see yourself as the snowboarder, or were you Natalie Allport, the athlete, and that snowboarding was just part of who you were? Because I think if we change the way we look at who we are and what we are, then when those things come to an end, or we fail or we fall short and that shift happens, it doesn't have as much of a mental impact on us as it otherwise would when we're only seeing ourselves as one thing, you know?
Yeah.
Was that kind of fit where you were coming from? Did you see yourself as the snowboarder, or were you a bunch of other things like you are now, where you're an entrepreneur, you're preparing a TED talk, you're a podcast host, you have all these other things, you're a CrossFit athlete. So there's multiple pieces of who makes up Natalie. Before that, was it just the one thing? Is that Sid?
Yeah, it's funny because I did, especially my last season. I'd already started my business. I had the CrossFit, and that helped for a time, especially transitioning. Like, oh, I spent 8 hours a day snowboarding. Well, now I'm just gonna spend 8 hours a day in the gym. So, like making that transition. But at the same time, no, like I completely wrapped my identity around being a national athlete. Like even when I joined my CrossFit gym, everyone thought I was cool because I was this national team snowboarder. They were all following my season. Everyone showed attention to me. Even if I wasn't the best in the gym at CrossFit, I still was getting a lot of just attention because I was doing this other thing at a high level and just using CrossFit. So then it started thinking, if I go to a party and people aren't going to introduce me as a national team snowboarder, will anyone like me? Is there anything cool about me that will help me make friends? My parents are amazing, but at the same time, of course, their parents are going to talk to their friends and say, oh yeah, my daughter, she's traveling this and doing this. So I thought, like, am I letting them down? All the people that have invested in me, like, so everything, exactly, my identity was completely wrapped up in what I was doing and being that national athlete, that I thought, what would I do? Like, who am I without this? And so now I like to say I'm a human being first, and then a human doing second, like human being, not human doing. And that's how I look at things now, but only because I knew that I looked at things so poorly back then. Not poorly, but I think most of us get caught in that trap. And we can't really afford to think about other things, right? The national team tells us, like, don't do school at the same time. Don't do these things. You need to give your all. My coaches sat me down and they said, if you want to make a run for 2018 Olympics, like, we understand you have your business and you love training, but you need to set that time off and spend more time on snow, more just doing this, right? And I started realizing I like these other things, and I don't want, what if I crash and something happens really bad in snowboarding, that I can never do these other things? And so that's where things started to change mentally there, and what led me, in a sense, to stepping away from the sport. But I think a lot of us definitely get trapped into thinking that's our only identity, when it's like, no, who we are as a person matters most.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I love that you were willing to share that, because I think a lot of young athletes especially struggle with being good at a sport and then being that sport, especially early on. If you are successful early and all of a sudden the name comes attached to the sport that you play, and everywhere you go, you're that person, it's hard to get away from it, and it's hard to change that mindset. So I appreciate you touching that, because I know it's kind of one of those subjects that probably gets a little bit tough sometimes, because when I think back on it, I still have emotional ties to being a baseball player. I've worked through that and I've moved past it, but it's still there. And so it takes a lot of effort to find a value in being something else and being good at other things, and knowing that your value isn't the sport you play, but what you bring. And so I appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and join us again next time as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But no matter what happens, remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please take a moment now to subscribe, rate, and review our show. We are all on the edge of greatness.